The snap of my own bone was the loudest sound I'd ever heard, a sickening crack that echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the kitchen. But it was the silence from my son, Mark, standing frozen a few feet away, his face a pale, unreadable mask, that truly shattered something deep within me. Brenda, his wife, my daughter-in-law, stood over me, her chest heaving, her face contorted in a fury that was terrifyingly familiar, yet this time it had crossed a line from which there was no return. "You old fool," she hissed, her voice venomous. In that moment, as I cradled my throbbing, unnaturally bent left arm, I knew my life, as I'd known it, was over. Little did she know, in her blind rage, she had just set the stage for the implosion of her own. If this story finds you, please subscribe to the channel for more like it. And tell me, where in the world are you watching from? I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Stick around, because this is the story of how my broken arm led to her broken life. My name is Eleanor Ainsworth, and until that dreadful afternoon, I considered myself a fortunate woman, if a somewhat lonely one since my dear Arthur passed. I was 62, a retired librarian, a mother who had poured her soul into raising her only child, Mark. Arthur and I hadn't been wealthy, but we were comfortable, prudent. We'd always lived modestly, valuing experiences and education over material possessions. Our greatest investment, we always said, was Mark. I'd made sure he had everything he needed, often going without myself, especially after Arthur was gone. When Mark met Brenda, I was, of course, hopeful. She was striking, ambitious, full of plans. I saw a spark in Mark that had been missing, and for that, I was initially grateful. They married, and soon after, they wanted to buy a house. Arthur, always cautious, had left me a small portfolio and our own comfortable, mortgage-free home, but it wasn't a fortune. Still, Mark was my world. So, I'd given them a substantial sum for the down payment on their modern, four-bedroom house in a newly developed suburb far grander than anything Arthur and I had ever aspired to. Arthur, bless his foresight, had insisted, even back then when we'd helped with Mark's college fund, that any significant financial assistance should be documented. He'd had a solicitor draw up a simple loan agreement for the house money, with nominal interest, repayable upon demand or the sale of the property. "Just in case, Ellie," he'd said, his kind eyes serious. "For your protection. Family is family, but business is business when sums get large." Mark and Brenda had signed it readily, probably thinking it was just a formality, something an old man insisted upon. I'd tucked it away with Arthur's papers, half forgotten, assuming, like them, it would never be more than a piece of paper. How wrong I was. After a few years, when my own house started to feel too large and quiet, and perhaps sensing my loneliness, or more likely, seeing an opportunity, Mark and Brenda suggested I sell it and move in with them. They had a perfect little granny suite downstairs, they said. It would be practical. I could help with future grandchildren, though none had yet appeared, and they could keep an eye on me. I hesitated. Brenda had a sharp edge I'd begun to notice more frequently. Her initial charm had worn thin, revealing a woman who was deeply materialistic and possessed of a startling sense of entitlement. She often made dismissive comments about my old-fashioned ways, my modest clothes, my quiet hobbies. Mark, bless his heart, seemed oblivious, or perhaps he chose to be. He adored Brenda, or at least, was thoroughly managed by her. But the thought of being closer to Mark, of not being so alone, was a powerful lure. I sold my beloved home, the place Arthur and I had shared for 35 years, and gave them a significant portion of the proceeds for renovations, to the granny suite and to, as Brenda put it, ease the financial burden of having me. The granny suite turned out to be a converted storage area in the basement, somewhat damp and with a tiny window that looked out onto a concrete retaining wall. It was not what I had envisioned. The incident with my arm happened on a Tuesday. Brenda had been in a foul mood all morning. She'd received a bill, something to do with her latest online boutique venture that wasn't doing well, and she was pacing the kitchen like a caged panther. I was quietly making myself a cup of tea, trying to stay out of her way. She'd been increasingly vocal about needing more capital for her business, dropping heavy hints that my remaining savings would be a smart investment. I had gently but firmly refused the previous evening. I needed that money for my own future, my own potential care. Arthur's words about protection echoed faintly. "It's your fault, you know," she suddenly spat, whirling to face me. "If you weren't so selfish with your money, I wouldn't be in this mess. Mark's inheritance is tied up with you, and it's not fair." "Brenda," I said, my voice calm, though my heart began to thump. "We've discussed this. That money is for my long-term security. And it's not Mark's inheritance. Arthur left his estate to me." "Semantics," she shrieked, her face flushing an ugly red. "You're just an old woman sitting on a pile of cash you don't even need. We need it. Mark deserves it." She advanced on me. I stood my ground, by the counter, my teacup rattling in its saucer. "I have helped you both considerably, Brenda. Perhaps it's time your business stood on its own feet." Her eyes narrowed into slits. "You useless, stubborn old hag," she was closer now, invading my personal space, radiating a palpable anger. Mark walked in then, looking for his car keys, and paused, sensing the tension. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice hesitant. "Your mother is being impossible." Brenda snarled, not taking her eyes off me. She then reached out and grabbed my arm, the one holding the teacup. "You will give us that money." "Brenda, no." I cried, more in shock than pain at first. I tried to pull away. The teacup smashed to the floor. "Don't you dare walk away from me," she screamed, and then she twisted. Not a push, not a shove. A deliberate, vicious twist of my forearm. I heard it. That grotesque, sharp, cracking sound. An explosion of agony shot up my arm, so intense it stole my breath. I crumpled, a choked scream tearing from my throat as I hit the cold kitchen tiles, my left arm held protectively against my chest, already feeling alien and horribly wrong. Through a haze of pain, I saw Brenda step back, her expression shifting from fury to something like shock, maybe even a flicker of fear, as she looked at my arm, then at me on the floor. Mark rushed forward, finally galvanized. "Mom? Oh my God, Mom, what happened?" He knelt beside me, his face ashen. She fell," Brenda stammered, her voice suddenly higher, thinner. "She just slipped and fell. Clumsy." I looked at Mark, tears of pain and betrayal streaming down my face. "She broke my arm, Mark," I whispered, the words barely audible. "She twisted it." Mark looked from me to Brenda, his expression torn. Brenda was already composing herself, her features hardening back into a mask of indignation. "Don't be ridiculous, Eleanor. You fell. You're getting frail. You know how you stumble." The lie was so blatant, so cruel, it was like another blow. And Mark? Mark just looked confused, helpless. He didn't contradict her. He didn't defend me. He helped me up, his touch gentle but his eyes avoiding mine, and the silence of his complicity was the second break I endured that day, the one that pierced my heart. The hospital confirmed it, a spiral fracture of the ulna. A nasty break, the doctor said, a twisting injury. He'd looked at me then, a question in his eyes, but I'd just mumbled something about a fall, a clumsy accident. Brenda's version. What else could I say, with Mark standing there, pale and silent, offering no support? To accuse my daughter-in-law in front of strangers, with my son effectively siding with her through his inaction, felt like a humiliation too profound to bear on top of the physical agony. They put my arm in a heavy cast, from wrist to shoulder, and prescribed strong painkillers. The pain was immense, a constant, throbbing fire that no amount of medication seemed to entirely quench. But it was dull compared to the ache in my soul. Brenda and Mark drove me back to their house. The atmosphere in the car was thick with unspoken words, with my stifled sobs and Brenda's stony, resentful silence. Mark kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed, but he said nothing. When we arrived, Brenda announced, "You can't stay in the granny suite. Those stairs will be impossible with your arm, and I can't be waiting on you hand and foot." Where will I go?" I asked, my voice weak. "We've found a place," Mark said, finally speaking, though he still wouldn't meet my eyes. "A small residential care facility. Just until you're better. They can help you with things." My heart sank. A care facility. I was only 62. I wasn't infirm, just injured by her. The next day, they moved me. It wasn't a care facility in any gentle sense of the word. It was a dreary, understaffed boarding house for the elderly, smelling of disinfectant and despair. My room was tiny, with a narrow bed, a chipped formica dresser, and a window that overlooked a brick wall. The shared bathroom was down a dimly lit corridor. This was where my son and his wife had deposited me, like an inconvenient piece of luggage. They paid the first month's rent, told me they'd transfer a small allowance into my account for essentials, and then they left. Mark hugged me stiffly, his eyes still averted. Brenda didn't even pretend. The days that followed were a blow of pain, both physical and emotional. My arm throbbed relentlessly. Simple tasks like dressing, washing, or even eating became monumental struggles with only one good hand. The other residents were mostly much older, lost in their own worlds of dementia or illness. I felt utterly alone, abandoned. My granny suite in the basement, which I had once found so inadequate, now seemed like a palace in comparison. At least there, I had my books, my radio, a semblance of my own life. Here, I had nothing. I would lie in bed for hours, replaying that horrific moment in the kitchen. Brenda's face, contorted with rage. The snap of my bone. And Mark's devastating silence. Why hadn't he stood up for me? Was he afraid of her? Or did he, too, see me as a burden, an obstacle to the life Brenda wanted for them? The sacrifices I'd made for him paraded through my mind, the extra shifts I'd worked when he was young after Arthur's first heart scare, the careful saving for his education, the home I'd sold to be near him. All of it, it seemed, counted for nothing. I had poured my love into a sieve. I felt erased. My identity as a mother, as Eleanor Ainsworth, felt stripped away. I was just an old woman with a broken arm, warehoused and forgotten. Sometimes, the shame was so intense I could barely breathe. Shame for being so easily discarded. Shame for having raised a son who would allow this. What had I done wrong? Where had I failed? The questions tormented me during the long, sleepless nights, accompanied only by the distant coughs and murmurs of the other residents and the relentless ache in my arm. I tried calling Mark a few times. The first time, Brenda answered. "He's busy," she'd said curtly, and hung up. The second time, Mark answered, his voice strained. "Mom, I can't talk right now." "Brenda's not, she's still upset about your fall, my fall." He was sticking to her lie. It was a fresh stab to the heart. "I miss you, Mark," I'd whispered. "Yeah, well, get better soon, Mom," he'd replied, his tone hollow, and then he too had hung up. After that, I stopped calling. What was the point? Each attempt only deepened the wound, reinforced my isolation. Rock bottom arrived about 3 weeks in. My cast was starting to smell. I hadn't had a proper wash in days. The food was inedible, and I'd lost weight I couldn't afford to lose. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, staring at the peeling paint on the wall, and a profound wave of despair washed over me. Perhaps Brenda was right. Perhaps I was useless. Perhaps it would be better for everyone if I just wasn't. The thought, dark and insidious, curled around my mind. I felt completely, utterly defeated, invisible not just to my family, but to the world. The pain in my arm was a constant reminder of my brokenness, inside and out. This, I thought, is where I will fade away. Then, one bleak afternoon, as I was listlessly sorting through the one small box of personal belongings they'd allowed me to bring, mostly old photographs, and a few of Arthur's worn paperbacks, my fingers brushed against a stiff, manila envelope tucked at the very bottom. It was dusty, forgotten. I didn't even remember packing it. Curiosity, a feeling I hadn't experienced in weeks, stirred faintly. With my good hand, I managed to pull it out. It was addressed to me, in Arthur's familiar, neat script. Inside were several folded documents, yellowed with age, and a short, handwritten letter. My dearest Ellie, it began. If you are reading this, then I am likely gone, and I hope life is treating you kindly. I am tucking this away with some other bits and pieces. It concerns that little commercial property I bought on Miller Street, the one I got for a song all those years ago, as a bit of a folly. The Arthur's folly, as you used to call it. I know you probably think it's worthless, and perhaps it is. But I always had a feeling about that area. Enclosed are the deeds solely in my name, so now, through my will, solely yours and the latest property tax assessments I have. Maybe it'll be worth something one day. Maybe not. But it's yours. Do with it as you see fit. All my love, Arthur. Arthur's Folly. I remembered it vaguely. A dilapidated, 2-story storefront in a rather run-down part of the city, near the old railway yards. He'd bought it in the 70s for next to nothing. I'd completely forgotten its existence. Surely, it was still worthless, probably condemned by now. Yet, holding Arthur's letter, feeling the crispness of the old deeds, a tiny spark ignited within the cold emptiness of my despair. It was something of Arthur's, something he had left for me. A connection to a time when I was loved, valued. One of the aides at the facility, a young woman named Sarah with kind eyes and a gentle manner, sometimes stayed a few extra minutes to chat with me. She was studying part-time to be a paralegal. The next day, summoning a courage I didn't know I possessed, I asked her if she knew anything about Miller Street. Miller Street? Near the old rail yards, she said, surprised. Wow, that area's completely changed, Mrs. Ainsworth. They've been redeveloping it like crazy. New lofts, boutiques, restaurants. It's become really trendy. Land down there is worth a fortune now. A fortune. My heart gave a strange flutter. Could it be? Could Arthur's Folly, the forgotten relic, actually be valuable? I showed Sarah the letter and the deeds, my hand trembling slightly. Her eyes widened as she read. Mrs. Ainsworth, she said slowly, if you own property on Miller Street, you might be sitting on something quite significant. That evening, Sarah brought in her laptop. We looked up the address on the deed. There it was, a somewhat grimy, but structurally intact, small building, sandwiched between a chic new art gallery and a bustling cafe. Online property portals estimated its value at a figure that made me gasp. It wasn't just valuable, it was a lifeline. It was power. It was a way out of this dismal room, a way to reclaim my life. The despair that had clung to me like a shroud began to lift, replaced by a surge of adrenaline, a nascent sense of purpose. This property, this gift from Arthur, was mine. Untouched by Mark and Brenda. They didn't even know it existed. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker not just of hope, but of anger transformed into a cold, clear resolve. They had broken my arm, broken my trust, and discarded me. They thought I was finished. They were wrong. The first seed of a plan began to germinate. I needed to secure this asset. I needed to understand its full potential. And I needed help, professional help. I thought of Arthur's words, "For your protection, he had protected me even from beyond the grave." I would not let his foresight be in vain. I would use this. Not for revenge, not initially. But for survival. For dignity. For justice. The future, which had seemed like a terrifying black hole, suddenly held a sliver of light. My arm still throbbed, but now, it felt less like a symbol of my victimhood and more like a battle scar, a reminder of what I was fighting for. I was Eleanor Ainsworth. And I was not done yet. The very next day, I asked Sarah if she knew a good, discreet lawyer. She mentioned a Mr. Howard Goldstein, a senior partner at a reputable downtown firm, known for his tenacity and his work with estate and property law. He helped my aunt with a complicated inheritance case, she said. He's expensive, but he's the best, and he's got a soft spot for a genuine underdog, an underdog. That was certainly me. Using the payphone in the dreary hall of the care facility, I didn't dare use my mobile, in case Mark and Brenda were somehow tracking my calls. A paranoid thought, but I was past taking chances. I called Mr. Goldstein's office. I explained, briefly, that I was an elderly woman in a difficult situation, with a potentially valuable, recently rediscovered property. I mentioned Sarah's name. To my surprise, I was put through to him almost immediately. His voice was calm, measured, but with an underlying warmth. I told him my story, haltingly at first, then with growing confidence, as he listened patiently, interrupting only to ask clarifying questions. I told him about Arthur's folly, about the down payment for Mark and Brenda's house, about the loan agreement Arthur had insisted upon, and finally, fighting back tears, I told him about my arm. There was a long pause on the other end of the line when I finished. "Mrs. Ainsworth," he said, his voice now laced with a steely edge I hadn't heard before. "What your daughter-in-law did constitutes assault. What your son is doing constitutes neglect and potentially financial elder abuse, especially if they have control over your finances, or assets beyond that small allowance." He paused again. "I'd be honored to represent you. Can you come to my office? Or perhaps, given your injury, it would be better if I came to you." A wave of relief so profound washed over me that I nearly wept. Someone believed me. Someone was willing to fight for me. We arranged for him to visit me at the facility 2 days later. I asked Sarah to be there as a witness, and she readily agreed. Mr. Goldstein arrived, a distinguished man in his late 60s with kind eyes that nonetheless missed nothing. He exuded an air of quiet competence. He examined Arthur's documents, the deeds to Miller Street, the carefully drafted loan agreement for the down payment on Mark and Brenda's house. He listened again, as I recounted the events, his expression growing graver, as I described the assault and my subsequent abandonment. Sarah corroborated my current living conditions. "Right," he said, finally, decisively. "First, let's secure Arthur's folly. We'll set up a limited liability company, an LLC, with you as the sole owner. The property will be transferred into the LLC. This will shield it and provide a layer of anonymity for now. Second, this loan agreement, he tapped the document. It's perfectly valid. Repayable upon demand. We will, at the appropriate moment, demand repayment. Third, your living situation is unacceptable. We need to get you out of here and into a safe, comfortable place. We can use the projected value of the Miller Street property to secure a small bridging loan if necessary, or an advance from a compassionate lender I know. And fourth, he continued, his gaze softening, your arm. I want you to see an orthopedic specialist I trust, get a full medical report. And I want you to start proper physiotherapy. Your recovery is paramount. He also suggested I document everything I could remember about Brenda's behavior, Mark's passivity, any financial transactions. Over the next few weeks, a whirlwind of activity began, all orchestrated quietly by Mr. Goldstein. The LLC was formed, Ainsworth Holdings, the Miller Street property was legally transferred. Mr. Goldstein engaged a commercial real estate appraiser, whose valuation of Arthur's Folly far exceeded even Sarah's optimistic estimates. The area was booming. Developers were clamoring for space. He also found me a small, clean, furnished apartment in a quiet building with good security, and arranged for a home care assistant to help me until my arm was stronger. The relief of leaving that dreadful facility was indescribable. It felt like emerging from a tomb. My personal transformation began subtly. The physiotherapy for my arm was painful, arduous, but with each small movement regained, I felt a corresponding surge in my internal strength. Learning to manage on my own, even with some help, fostered a sense of independence I hadn't realized I'd lost. Mr. Goldstein encouraged me to learn about my finances, about the LLC, about the redevelopment plans for Miller Street. I started reading financial news, researching property management. I, Eleanor Ainsworth, who had once felt erased, was slowly, painstakingly, rebuilding myself, piece by piece. I became quieter, more observant. My grief and pain were still there, a dull ache beneath the surface, but now they were overlaid with a steely determination. I was no longer just a victim. I was a survivor, and I was preparing. Mr. Goldstein also investigated the ownership of the house Mark and Brenda lived in. The loan I'd provided had indeed been for the down payment, and it was substantial, nearly 40% of the purchase price at the time. They had a mortgage for the rest. The loan agreement Arthur had drafted was ironclad. They've likely forgotten the specifics of this, or assumed you'd never act on it, Mr. Goldstein mused. People have a convenient way of forgetting uncomfortable truths. The initial strategic actions were taken discreetly. The LLC now officially owned Miller Street. I started receiving inquiries from developers, which Mr. Goldstein handled. We weren't in a rush to sell. We were exploring options, leasing, developing it ourselves on a small scale. The power of having options was intoxicating. I also, on Mr. Goldstein's advice, opened new bank accounts, ensuring Mark and Brenda had no access or knowledge of them. The small allowance they'd been sending to my old account, which had barely covered the cost of toiletries at the facility, was the only financial link left, and even that, Mr. Goldstein said, we would address in due course. I found a new specialist for my arm, the one Mr. Goldstein recommended. Dr. Ramirez was thorough and compassionate. Her report on my injury was detailed, clearly stating it was consistent with a forceful, violent twisting action, not a simple fall. That report went into Mr. Goldstein's files. During this time, there was silence from Mark and Brenda. No calls, no visits. It was as if I had ceased to exist for them, now that I was out of their house and no longer an immediate problem or a perceived source of funds. That silence, which had once devastated me, now fueled my resolve. They had no idea what was coming. They had mistaken my grief for permanent weakness, my love for limitless compliance. They had underestimated Eleanor Ainsworth. And they had certainly underestimated Arthur's folly. The first tremors of the earthquake that would eventually shatter Brenda's carefully constructed world began subtly, about 3 months after my fall. Following Mr. Goldstein's carefully timed strategy, he dispatched a formal, legally registered letter to Mark and Brenda. It was a demand for the full and immediate repayment of the loan I had provided for the down payment on their house, citing the repayable upon demand clause. The letter detailed the original sum, the nominal accrued interest as per the agreement, and gave them 30 days to comply. I could only imagine the scene when that letter arrived. Brenda, who considered herself so financially astute with her failing online boutiques, would have likely dismissed it at first, perhaps laughed it off, as some kind of mistake, or a pathetic attempt by me to get attention. Mark, weaker and more prone to anxiety, would have worried. But I suspect Brenda's arrogance would have initially won out. Their first response, about a week later, was not from a lawyer, but a dismissive, handwritten note from Brenda, addressed to me via Mr. Goldstein's office. It was full of scorn. "Eleanor," it read, "if this is your pathetic attempt to get back at us for your little accident, it won't work. That money was a gift. We don't owe you anything. Stop harassing us." Mr. Goldstein simply smiled when he read it. "Arrogance is a gift to the opposing counsel, Mrs. Ainsworth," he said. "She's just confirmed receipt and acknowledged the core issue, while simultaneously denying a legally binding document she herself signed." Excellent. He then dispatched a second letter, this one more forceful, including a notarized copy of the original loan agreement with their signatures clearly visible, and a warning that failure to make arrangements for repayment within 15 days would result in legal proceedings to recover the debt, which could include placing a lien on their property or forcing its sale. This, apparently, got their attention. The next communication was from a bewildered-sounding solicitor they had hastily engaged. He requested a copy of the agreement, which Mr. Goldstein duly provided, along with a polite, but firm reiteration of our position. Meanwhile, things were progressing with Arthur's Folly, now Ainsworth Holdings. We'd decided against selling immediately. Instead, Mr. Goldstein had found a promising young architectural firm keen to lease the ground floor for their new offices, and a well-regarded local chef interested in the second floor for a small, exclusive restaurant. The combined projected rental income was significant, more than enough for me to live comfortably and build a secure future. Renovations were being planned, all funded through a business loan secured against the property itself. The irony was not lost on me. Brenda's greed had inadvertently pushed me to unearth a resource that would make me more independent and financially secure than ever before. The pressure on Mark and Brenda mounted. Their solicitor confirmed to them, no doubt, that the loan agreement was legitimate and enforceable. They didn't have the kind of money lying around to repay such a sum. Their lifestyle, I knew, was leveraged to the hilt. Brenda's boutiques were a drain, not a source of income. Their expensive cars were leased. Their social standing was built on an illusion of wealth they didn't truly possess. The confrontation, when it came, was not in a courtroom, at least not initially. It was on my terms. About a week before the deadline in Mr. Goldstein's second letter was due to expire, I received a frantic call. It was Mark. "Mom? Mom, we need to talk to you," he said, his voice tight with panic. "This whole loan thing, it's a mistake. Brenda's a wreck. We could lose the house." "There's no mistake, Mark," I replied, my voice calm, astonishingly steady. I was sitting in my new, sunlit apartment, my recovering arm resting on a comfortable cushion. Dr. Ramirez had said I was healing remarkably well. It's a debt, long overdue. But we can't pay it, Mom. Not all at once. Can't you just forget it? For me. His voice cracked. There it was, the appeal to the old mom, the one who always sacrificed, always forgave. I think it's best we discuss this formally, I said. Mr. Goldstein can arrange a meeting. Here, at my apartment. Day after tomorrow, 10 o'clock, and I hung up, my hand surprisingly firm. They arrived exactly at 10. Mark looked haggard, aged beyond his years. Brenda's usual immaculate composure was gone. Her expensive clothes looked rumpled, her eyes were puffy, and her face was set in a scowl that did nothing to hide the fear flickering within it. They expected, I think, to find me still broken, perhaps in another depressing room, ready to be browbeaten, or emotionally blackmailed. My apartment, though modest, was bright, clean, and tastefully furnished. I had fresh flowers on the coffee table. Mr. Goldstein was already there, a reassuring, solid presence in his impeccably tailored suit. I was dressed simply but neatly, my arm in a less cumbersome sling, my hair styled. I felt a quiet strength emanating from within. Eleanor, Brenda began, her voice sharp, foregoing any pleasantries, this is insane. You can't seriously be doing this to your own son. Please, have a seat, Mr. Goldstein interjected smoothly, gesturing to the sofa. They sat, perched on the edge, radiating tension. I let Mr. Goldstein do most of the initial talking. He calmly reiterated the terms of the loan, the legality of the demand, the consequences of non-payment. Brenda interrupted constantly, her voice rising. It was a gift. You said it was a gift, Eleanor. You're just being vindictive because you fell. I did not fall, Brenda, I said, my voice quiet, but carrying an undeniable weight of conviction. You grabbed my arm. You twisted it. You broke it. I looked directly into her eyes. She flinched, her gaze dropping for a fraction of a second before fury reignited. How dare you? You senile old woman, you're delusional, she shrieked, half rising from the sofa. Mark put a restraining hand on her arm, his face anguished. Brenda, please. Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Goldstein said, his tone icy, we have a full medical report from Dr. Ramirez, a specialist in orthopedics, detailing the nature of Mrs. Ainsworth's injury. It is entirely consistent with her account of a forceful assault, and entirely inconsistent with a simple fall by a person of her mobility. He let that sink in. Brenda's face went pale. The fight seemed to drain out of her. The fact is, I continued, my voice still calm, the loan is due. You have benefited from it for many years. Arthur, my late husband, made that loan in good faith, to help his son. He also put provisions in place to protect me. I am now invoking those provisions. Mark finally found his voice, a pleading whine. Mom, we'll be ruined. We'll lose the house. Everything. Where will we go? I looked at my son, the boy I had loved so fiercely. The pain of his betrayal was still a raw wound. You should have thought of that, Mark, I said, my voice devoid of the maternal softness he was accustomed to. You should have thought of that when you stood by and watched your wife assault your mother. You should have thought of that when you dumped me in that dreadful place and ignored my calls. You made your choices. Brenda made hers. Brenda stared at me, her mouth agape. The full realization of her predicament, of my transformation from a perceived docile victim into someone with agency and power, seemed to crash down upon her. She saw not just the loss of the house, but the collapse of her ambitions, her social standing. She saw the potential legal repercussions of the assault, which Mr. Goldstein had so subtly dangled. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling, and it was her own actions, her own cruelty, that had brought it about. She had broken my arm, and in doing so, she had indeed accidentally, but irrevocably, started the process of breaking her own life. The power in the room had shifted, decisively. I wasn't shouting. I didn't need to. I simply sat there, a woman who had found her strength in the ashes of her deepest despair. The downfall of Mark and Brenda was not swift and dramatic in a public sense, but rather a slow, grinding erosion of everything they had valued. They couldn't repay the loan. Their attempt to secure a second mortgage to cover the amount failed. Their debt-to-income ratio was already too high, largely due to Brenda's failing business ventures and their extravagant spending. Mr. Goldstein, true to his word, initiated legal proceedings to place a lien on their house. Faced with the inevitable, and with their own solicitor advising them that their position was untenable, they were forced to sell. The housing market had cooled slightly since they'd bought, and after the outstanding mortgage and the repayment of my loan with interest were settled, there was very little left over for them. Certainly not enough for a down payment on another house of similar stature, or even a modest apartment in a decent area. Brenda's online boutiques, which had always been propped up by a flow of cash she wheedled from Mark or took from their joint accounts, collapsed entirely without that infusion. The facade of their affluence shattered. I heard through snippets from Sarah, who still kept an occasional, discreet touch with a cousin who lived in Mark and Brenda's old neighborhood, that the recriminations between them were bitter and constant. Brenda blamed Mark for not handling me, for being weak. Mark, finally seeing Brenda's true nature unvarnished by success or charm, blamed her for her greed and cruelty. Their marriage, built on such shaky foundations of materialism and dominance, crumbled under the strain. Within 6 months of losing the house, Brenda left Mark. She moved in with a sister in another state, her dreams of being a suburban queen and business magnate in tatters. The accidental breaking of her life was becoming quite thorough. Mark, alone and adrift, found himself living in a small, rented room, working a second job to make ends meet. The shame of his situation, and perhaps a dawning, genuine remorse, finally seemed to penetrate his self-absorption. About a year after the confrontation in my apartment, he called me. His voice was hesitant, humbled. "Mom," he began, I don't know if you'll even talk to me. But I wanted to say, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. For everything. For your arm, for how I treated you, for letting Brenda, for just everything. I was a coward. I was a fool. I listened, my heart a strange mix of old pain and a new, cautious detachment. Was this genuine? Or was it the plea of a man who had lost everything and was seeking a lifeline? "Thank you for saying that, Mark," I replied, my voice even. "It means something to hear it." He asked if he could see me. I hesitated. The wounds were deep. "Perhaps, Mark," I said. "In time." "I need more time." I wasn't ready to let him back into my life fully, not yet. Boundaries, Mr. Goldstein had taught me, were essential. And my own emotional healing was my priority. My healing was progressing steadily. The renovations on Arthur's Folly, now the Ainsworth Building, were completed. The architectural firm moved into the stunningly redesigned ground floor, and the chef's intimate little restaurant upstairs, Arthur's Table, quickly became one of the most sought-after reservations in the city. The income from these leases provided me with a comfortable and secure life, far beyond anything I had ever expected. I moved from my temporary apartment into a lovely condominium in a building with a garden, a place filled with light and peace. I reconnected with old friends, people I had drifted away from during my years of focusing so intensely on Mark and then enduring my isolation. I joined a book club, started volunteering at the local library again, the place where I had spent so many happy years. I even took a pottery class, discovering a small, unexpected talent for shaping clay, for creating something beautiful with my own hands that were now fully healed, if occasionally still a little stiff in the morning. The legal threat of assault charges against Brenda still existed, documented in Dr. Ramirez's report in Mr. Goldstein's files. But I chose not to pursue it. Her life had unraveled through her own actions. The financial consequences, the loss of her home and marriage, the public failure of her ambitions, these were direct results of the chain of events she had set in motion when she grabbed my arm. My victory was my peace, my independence, my rediscovered self-worth. That was justice enough for me. I was healing, not by forgetting the pain, but by building a new life around it. A life that was mine, truly mine. Today, 5 years after that dreadful afternoon in Brenda's kitchen, my life is settled and content. The Ainsworth building thrives, a quiet testament to Arthur's foresight and my own resilience. Arthur's table has a Michelin star, if you can believe it, and the young architects downstairs have won several awards for their innovative designs. I take a quiet satisfaction in its success, not for the money, though that provides security, but for the legacy it represents. It's a place of creativity and joy, risen from a forgotten folly. I did eventually allow Mark back into my life, but on very different terms. Our relationship is tentative, still rebuilding. He visits occasionally, no longer the entitled son, but a man humbled by his mistakes, working to prove his remorse is genuine. He is slowly paying back, in small installments, some of the money I spent on my care after they abandoned me, something he offered to do, unprompted. It's a gesture, and I accept it as such. Brenda is, as far as I know, still living with her sister, her ambitions curtailed. I rarely think of her anymore. She is a closed chapter. With a portion of the income from the Ainsworth building, I established a small foundation, administered by Mr. Goldstein's firm. It's called Eleanor's Voice, and it provides grants and legal assistance to elderly individuals who have faced abuse or exploitation, particularly from within their own families. It's my way of ensuring that others, who find themselves in that dark place of feeling invisible and powerless, might find the help they need to reclaim their lives, just as I did. It gives my own painful experience a broader purpose, a way to transform suffering into strength for others. Looking back, the snap of my bone was indeed a turning point. It was an act of violence born of greed and cruelty, but it inadvertently set me free. It forced me to confront the reality of my situation, to shed the illusions I had clung to about my son's unwavering love and my daughter-in-law's basic decency. It pushed me to the edge, and then, with Arthur's unexpected gift, it offered me a path back, not to the life I had, but to a new one, stronger and more authentic. I learned that self-worth isn't granted by others, it's an internal compass. I learned that resilience isn't about avoiding falls, but about how you rise after being struck down. I learned that the quiet execution of a well-thought-out plan can be far more powerful than angry outbursts or demands for retribution. My arm healed, and in the process, so did my spirit. The scars remain, a faint silvery line on my forearm, a tender spot in my heart where a mother's unconditional love was met with betrayal. But they no longer define me. They are merely reminders of a battle fought and won, a quiet victory that allowed me to step into my own new dawn, a dawn filled with peace, purpose, and the quiet hum of a life well lived, on my own terms. I am Eleanor Ainsworth, and I am, finally, whole. Thanks for listening to my story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'd be so grateful. And please, feel free to share your own experiences or thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters, and your stories deserve to be heard.